I want to start today with a challenge. I
Yep.
want you to reach back into your memory, maybe all the way back to high school English class.
Okay.
Picture Mark Twain's Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Got it.
Mm.
Okay, now focus entirely on the character of Jim. What do you see?
Well, if we're being honest, for most people, the image is pretty specific. You probably see the superstitious sidekick.
A bit simple, baby.
Maybe a bit simple. A passive passenger on that raft, mostly there to facilitate Huck's moral growth. He's the scenery, not the protagonist.
But here is the provocation. Imagine that everything Jim said in that book, every superstition, every broken sentence, every bit of deference was a lie.
Or rather, a performance.
Exactly. A carefully calculated mask worn just to survive the day. Imagine that the second Huck or any other white character turned their back. Jim dropped the act and started discussing Voltaire, Locke, or the nuances of rhetorical theory.
It completely changes the gravity of the story. It reframes the entire American canon, and that is exactly what we are discussing today.
We are looking at James by Percival Everett.
And let's be clear right up front. This isn't just a retelling or some kind of fan fiction update. As the book puts it, this is a masterful rhetorical intervention into American history.
It is a massive topic.
Oh.
But before we dive in, we have to mention that you are experiencing a unique two-host AI conversation powered by Google's NotebookLM for deeper, more dynamic book analysis.
And we are doing something a little different with the format today.
We certainly are. Enjoy a bold new take on book coverage with this extended analysis. More than just a summary, which we also include, this feature examines how the author shapes argument, builds influence, and earns or loses your trust.
It gives you the tools to read with sharper insight and greater discernment.
Should you read this book? This should help. It's also excellent for aspiring writers. If you find this expanded format valuable, we'd love to hear from you. Your feedback helps guide our future content.
It's all about getting under the hood of the book. And with James, the engine is incredibly complex. It isn't just a story. It is an argument about who gets to tell stories.
So let's introduce the mechanic. Percival Everett. He's not exactly a new name on the scene, is he?
Not at all. Everett is a literary disruptor. If you've read his novel Erasure, or perhaps seen the recent film adaptation American Fiction, you know his territory.
He's built his career on deconstructing racial constructions.
Yes. He loves to poke at the way Black voices are consumed by white audiences, often satirizing the very industry that wants what he calls trauma porn rather than authentic experiences.
That context is so helpful. So when he decided to tackle Huckleberry Finn, which is arguably the American novel, he brought a lot of ethos or credibility to the table.
He certainly did. He isn't just some random writer deciding to fix Mark Twain for clout.
And that brings us to the exigence.
Correct.
Can you define that for us quickly?
Sure. In rhetoric, the exigence is the urgent need or demand that motivates a piece of writing. Why write this now?
Okay.
The analysis points out something crucial. Everett isn't writing this out of spite. He isn't trying to cancel Twain.
So what is the mission then?
It's about addressing a cultural failure. The book notes that the goal is to provide a vehicle for the agency Jim already possessed, but was denied the ability to articulate in the original text.
That's a subtle but massive distinction.
It's everything. He isn't giving Jim a brain. He is revealing the brain that was always there, hidden behind the mask.
And it clearly worked. I mean, we have to establish the credentials here because they are staggering. This book won the 2024 National Book Award for Fiction.
And the 2025 Pulitzer Prize for Fiction.
It is the literary heavy crown.
And that matters because it validates the argument the novel is making. It signals that the literary establishment is finally ready to accept this correction to the record.
Which brings us to the core argument. What is the book actually arguing?
That racial hierarchy is constructed. It's fake. The analysis suggests the novel challenges the idea that marginalized voices in classic literature were actually silent or simple.
Instead, it argues they were silenced.
Silenced by the authors who wrote them. It's an argument about who controls the narrative.
Okay, let's unpack this because here's where it gets really interesting. The book has this mechanic, this device that just floors you when you first encounter it. The code switching.
This is the aha moment for almost every reader. It is the hook that pulls you in immediately.
So in the book, you have James. He calls himself James, not Jim, and the other enslaved people. When they are alone, they speak perfect, complex, standard English.
Eloquent. Philosophical, even.
They debate the very nature of their reality, and the contrast is just jarring.
It really is.
Because the second a white person walks into the room, or even passes by snap, instantly, They switch to that thick, dialect-heavy slave speech that Twain made famous.
This is a brilliant use of logos or logical argument within the narrative itself.
How does that function as logic? I see it as a story device.
Well, the analysis describes this as a matrix of performance. It proves logically that the linguistic difference, the broken English, isn't a sign of low intelligence or inability.
It's a performance.
It's an imposed requirement from the white society. If they speak too well, they are a threat. If they speak dumb, they are safe.
So the survival tactic.
It reveals language as a power relation. The book highlights a specific note on the exhausting burden of constant performance.
Right.
Think about the mental energy required to constantly translate your complex thoughts into a lesser dialect just to keep your oppressors comfortable. It is not just about keeping secrets, it is literally about staying alive.
That concept of the burden really stuck with me.
Yeah.
It is one thing to act a part for an hour in a play. It is another to live it 24/7. You have to constantly monitor your tone, your vocabulary, your posture.
And if you slip up, the consequences are physical. That brings a huge amount of tension to scenes that, in Twain's book, seemed almost relaxed.
And the analysis mentions that this creates a huge cognitive dissonance for us as readers.
That is where the pathos, the emotional appeal, hits hard. This is where the perspectival reversal kicks in. In Twain's book, Jim is the object.
The thing being looked at by Huck.
Exactly. We only know what Huck tells us about him.
But here.
In Everett's book, James is the subject. He is the one looking out at the world. He is analyzing Huck. He is analyzing the society that enslaved him.
And that shift forces you to reevaluate everything you thought you knew about the original story. You're reconciling the plot you remember with this radically different internal reality.
It makes you wonder, did I miss this in the original? Or was I just not looking?
Everett doesn't let you look away. He uses these harrowing details to amplify that emotional impact. He takes familiar objects and makes them dangerous.
The pencil. We have to talk about the pencil.
It's a small object.
In our world, it's mundane. But in this context, it's revolutionary. James is a self-taught learned person. He reads and writes in secret.
In a world where enslaved literacy is illegal, punishable by maiming or death.
A pencil isn't just a tool, it is contraband. It is a weapon.
It changes the stakes of the adventure entirely. For Huck Finn, running away down the river is a lark. It's an adventure.
He's playing pirate. He can always go back to being a white boy if he gets bored.
But for James, as the authors explain, capture means death. Or worse, the river isn't a playground, it is a war zone.
And the analysis points to a specific scene that transforms abstract history into intimate human stakes. James's motivation for leaving.
Right, it is not just about freedom in the abstract sense.
No, he flees in a desperate attempt to avoid being sold away from his wife and daughter. That motivation, the destruction of the family unit, is something Twain touches on, but Everett forces you to feel the terror of it.
It's an impossible choice.
Every mile down the river is a mile away from his family, but staying means losing them anyway. It's an impossible choice.
There's also a scene mentioned in the book that is incredibly difficult to read but necessary to discuss to understand the book's tone. It's about the concealment motif.
Yes.
In Twain, hiding in the bushes is usually part of a farce or a game.
Yes, but in James, that trope is subverted so darkly. The book describes a scene where James witnesses a traumatic event, an enslaved woman being raped. He is hiding, unable to intervene without getting killed himself.
That is heavy.
It is, but he uses that concealment not for entertainment, but for moral witness. He bears witness to the horror because that is the only agency he has in that moment. It turns the hiding in the bushes trope into something devastatingly tragic.
He is forced to watch the brutality of his world without the power to stop it. It really highlights how Everett is taking the same puzzle pieces Twain used, but assembling them into a completely different picture.
That is a great analogy. He is using the master's tools to dismantle the master's house.
Before we get into how Everett fixes Twain's ending, and believe me, we need to talk about that ending because it has frustrated English majors for 100 years. I want to take a quick second.
Okay.
I want to mention something else that helps with deep thinking.
Yes, if you enjoy this kind of analysis, you should check out Mindful Moments. It is our YouTube channel offering AI book analysis, summaries, and critiques. It's all about inspiring reflection and rational thought, much like we are doing here.
Absolutely. So back to the river. We have to talk about the ending of Huckleberry Finn. Even diehard Twain fans usually admit the last 12 chapters are rough.
Rough is being generous. Critics have called them problematic, botched and evasive for a century. In the original, Tom Sawyer shows up and basically hijacks the narrative.
He turns Jim's escape into a game.
A cruel game. He humiliates Jim, makes him sleep with spiders and rats, and prolongs his captivity just for the sake of a romantic adventure story.
It is infuriating to read. Honestly, it turns a human being back into a prop. So what does Everett do?
He performs a structural exorcism. As the expert analysis notes, Everett disappears these events. He refuses to replicate the indignity.
He just cuts them.
He writes around them, he charts a new course, and this leads to a massive genre shift in the book. James starts as a satire, mirroring the early chapters of Huck Finn. But as it progresses, it transforms.
It becomes a thriller, and even a morality tale, as the book describes it.
Yes, I saw one critic quote it as saying, it becomes a Stations of the Cross type journey.
Oh, that's a powerful image.
It suggests that James is walking through the myriad horrors of slavery, one-by-one lynchings, minstrel shows, auctions, and this creates a bit of tension for the reader. The analysis points out that some critics felt the satire was abandoned too abruptly.
They wanted the jokes to keep coming.
But others argue that you can't joke your way out of slavery.
Right.
That's the consensus. The shift is viewed by many as a necessary move to prioritize ethical persuasion over ironic distance. At a certain point, the joke isn't funny anymore. The danger is too real.
The narrative breaks away from Twain's structure entirely.
It has to. Because, as the argument goes, James's story cannot be contained by a white narrative framework.
That makes sense. If you stick to Twain's plot, you are stuck with Twain's limitations. James needs his own path.
And that path leads to some shocking places.
Right.
We are going to tread carefully here because we have a strict no-spoiler policy regarding the ending.
But we have to mention the canon-shaking revelation.
Oh, boy.
Ah.
The revelation, I remember reading it and just putting the book down for a minute to process.
The analysis mentions there is a specific plot twist regarding James's relationship to Huck. We won't say what it is.
But the book notes that for some readers, it risks feeling contrived. It is a big swing. It borders on melodrama.
But for others, it resolves all the thematic tensions, right?
It does. It recontextualizes their entire dynamic. It forces the reader to look at Huck and James and ask, what is actually connecting these two, beyond just the raft?
It suggests a bond that is deeper, messier, and more intrinsic to American history than Twain ever admitted.
And this brings us to the reaction from readers. The book talks about the difference between information and understanding.
This is a crucial distinction.
Information is knowing the plot of Huckleberry Finn. You know they go down the river, you know they meet the Duke and the King. Understanding is realizing how that plot conditioned you to see Jim a certain way.
So the book forces you to recognize how narrative frameworks, the stories we are told, condition what we know about others.
It's like, if you only ever see someone through a dirty window, you assume they are blurry.
And James doesn't just clean the window.
No, James breaks the window entirely. The value of this book, according to the final analysis, is that it is so effective because it immerses readers so deeply they might forget the predecessor text.
That is the ultimate compliment, isn't it? That it stands so tall it casts a shadow over the original.
It creates a situation where you can never really read Huck Finn the same way again. Once you have seen the man behind the mask, the man discussing Voltaire in his sleep, you can't unsee him.
You can't go back to believing the superstition and the simplicity.
It effectively overwrites the cultural memory. It acts as a palimpsest, writing a new truth over the old one.
Which is exactly what a masterful rhetorical intervention should do.
It doesn't just comment on history, it changes how we view it.
So what does this all mean for us, the readers? Why does this matter beyond just being a good English literature assignment or a book club pick?
It matters because it asks us to question the classics. It asks us to look at the other silent characters on our bookshelves.
That is a haunting thought.
It should be. If this book proves that Jim had a whole universe inside him that Twain either couldn't see or chose not to show, who else are we missing?
What about the silent servants in Victorian novels? The indigenous guides in exploration narratives?
It forces you to be a more active, critical reader. You can't just consume the story. You have to interrogate it. You have to ask, who is holding the pen?
And who is holding their tongue?
And that is the power of James. It gives the tongue back to the person who should have had it all along. It's a reclamation of humanity. And it reminds us that agency isn't something you give to someone. It is something they have, whether you acknowledge it or not.
Well, we have covered a lot of ground today. We have gone from the rhetorical situation to the matrix of performance, through the pathos of the pencil, and all the way to the genre-bending structural shifts.
It is a dense, rich text. We have really only scratched the surface of what Everett has accomplished here.
Which is why we always encourage you to go to the source, read the book, grapple with it yourself, see if the twist works for you.
And pay attention to the language.
Yeah.
Watch the code switching. It is a masterclass in how we present ourselves to the world versus who we really are.
As we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final thought to chew on. We often say that history is written by the victors. We know that literature is often written by the privileged.
So
Look at your bookshelf. Look at those classics. How many of them are actually silencing the main character right in front of your face? Who else is wearing a mask that you just haven't noticed yet?
that is the question that keeps you up at night.
Indeed it is. If you want to dive even deeper, click the link on screen for the in-depth book summary. Subscribe, share, purchase via the link, and as always, think rationally.
And remember, there is always another layer to uncover.
Via the many genre-based book podcasts at Mindful Moments. Subscribe and nourish your mind on the go.